The river did not care what it carried. That was what Faye noticed first, standing on the bank with 2 guards at her back and the cold eating through her robes. The current simply moved. It took the first flask when Osric threw it, dark glass catching the torchlight for half a second before the water swallowed it whole. And it carried that flask the same way it carried everything else, without ceremony, without judgment. She watched the second flask follow the first, then the third. He did not look at her while he did it. That was the part that stayed with her afterward, longer than the cold, longer than the walk to the eastern gate. The Alpha King stood at the bank with his back to her and his arm moving in short, controlled arcs, and he did not once turn around, as if what he was destroying was not worth the effort of facing. The 4th flask, the 5th. The small linen sacks she had spent 3 weeks assembling went next, one after another, the dried compounds scattering briefly on the surface before the current took them under. Stop. The word came out before she had decided to speak. Those compounds take weeks to prepare. If Torrhen's fever spikes again before, take her to the eastern gate. Osric's voice was flat. He still had not turned around. Before first light, the guards moved. One took her arm, not roughly, but with the kind of deliberate grip that meant the conversation was finished, whether she agreed or not. Faye did not fight it. She had enough sense to understand that fighting it would accomplish nothing, and she had never been the kind of person who spent effort on nothing. She let them walk her back through the outer yard, through the servants' passage that ran along the inside of the eastern wall, and out through the gate the palace used for deliveries and exiles. The gate closed behind her, with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She stood in the dark outside the palace walls and listened to the river she could no longer see, still moving, still carrying things away, and thought about the flask she had prepared that morning, the one Osric had thrown last, the one she had been 2 days away from using. Her wolf went very still inside her. Then Faye turned east and started walking. 6 months before the night at the river, the heir to the throne of Arnfeld had developed a cough that did not go away. It had started small enough that no one thought to worry. Children coughed. Children ran fevers. Children recovered. The court's head healer had given Torrhen a tonic of nettle and honey and told the king it would pass within the week. It did not pass within the week. By the end of the first month, the cough had settled into Torrhen's chest with the kind of permanence that made healers stop using words like shortly and start using words like managing. By the second month, the fevers had arrived, irregular, stubborn, peaking without pattern, and dropping without explanation. By the 4th month, 3 different healers had cycled through the prince's chambers, and the boy who had once dragged his nursemaid through the palace gardens at a dead run was spending most of his days in bed. He was 6 years old. He would turn 7 in 3 months. That birthday mattered for reasons beyond the usual ones. Every Alpha King's heir underwent the rite of blood and name on their 7th year, a formal ceremony performed before the gathered council of the territory's Alphas, in which the heir's claim to succession was spoken aloud, witnessed, and sealed into the pack record. Not merely symbolic. In the law of their kind, the rite made the succession permanent and uncontestable. It could not be undone except by the heir's own death or formal renunciation. Once Torrhen underwent the rite, he was the heir, fully, irrevocably. And anything that came after him, any future child born to Osric's Luna, would have no claim. Isolde had understood this since before the betrothal. She had understood it the way one understands a distant storm, visible on the horizon, but not yet an immediate problem. She had 7 years to find another solution. 7 years to give Osric a child of her own blood, one whose claim would be complicated by Torrhen's existence, but not destroyed by it. She had not found that solution. In the weeks before Torrhen first fell ill, she had finally understood why. The healer she had consulted, discreetly, in a village 2 days from the palace, under a false name, had confirmed what she had begun to suspect over the past year. The word he had used was barren. He had said it with professional remove, the way healers said words that cost them nothing and cost their patients everything. Isolde had ridden back to the palace in silence. She had sat in her chambers that night and thought about Torrhen's 7th birthday, about the rite, about what it meant for the rest of her life, and what it meant for the question of why she had agreed to this marriage in the first place. Then she had gone to her chest and removed the small locked box that had come with her from her family's estate in the Northern Highlands. The one her mother had pressed into her hands the morning she left for the palace, saying only, "In case." The powder inside was pale gray, almost white. Her family had kept it for generations, a remedy for certain infections, at careful doses that became something else entirely at others. Within 3 weeks, the cough had started in Torrhen's chambers. By the time Edric arrived at the palace, Torrhen's fever had climbed to the kind of height that made the boy's eyes lose focus when he spoke. 4 healers had come and gone. The 4th had lasted 11 days before quietly telling Osric's steward that she had done everything she knew how to do. Edric was not summoned so much as he appeared. He was that kind of man, old enough that no one questioned how he had heard about the situation, and respected enough that no one turned him away at the gate. He examined Torrhen for an hour, asked for the room to himself in the way that ancient healers did, with authority that did not require explanation, and then came to find Osric in the great hall with his hands folded and his expression carrying the weight of a man about to say something the other person would not want to hear. "The boy's wolf is suppressed," Edric said. "Not gone, suppressed. Whatever is moving through his system, his own body is working against him rather than with him. The natural healing is stalled." Osric's jaw tightened. "You can treat it. My hands aren't steady enough for the work it requires." Edric said it without apology or embarrassment. "I know what it needs, and I know who can do it. There is a healer in the frontier lands of Fenwick, a woman I trained some years ago now. She has a sensitivity to compounds that most healers miss. What is happening to your son is the kind of thing she would catch. Send for her. She may not come willingly. Send for her anyway." The men arrived at Faye's door on a Tuesday morning when she was in the middle of grinding dried bark and genuinely did not want to be interrupted. There were 3 of them. Palace guards, by the cut of their coats and the particular way they stood in her doorway, as if the smallness of the room was an inconvenience they were graciously tolerating. The one in front told her that her presence was requested by the Alpha King of Arnfeld. He said it the way people said things that were requests in word only. Faye set down her pestle. "Edric sent you," she said. "The healer Edric recommended you. How long has the child been ill?" 6 months. She looked at the guards, then at the half-ground bark on the table, then at the arrangement of drying herbs along her window ledge that would need turning in 4 days, or they would lose potency entirely. "I'll need to bring my own supplies," she said, "and a horse with enough saddlebag room to carry them." The guard nodded. "Give me an hour." She spent that hour packing with the focused calm of someone who had learned, over years of being called to difficult situations, that calm was the most useful thing she could bring. The bark compounds first, then the dried roots, then the fresh preparations she had been building over the past weeks. She tried not to think about the way the guard had said 6 months like it was a piece of information and not a child's life measured out in bad nights. Her wolf moved uneasily while she worked. Not because of the guards. They were straightforward, no threat in their bearing, no deception in what she could read from them. Something else, something forward-facing. The particular restlessness she recognized from the moments before a difficult case, when the animal part of her registered what was coming before the thinking part had assembled it into words. Faye had learned to pay attention to that feeling. She had also learned that it did not always tell her what she thought it was telling her. She slung the bag over her shoulder, secured the window latch, and followed the guards to the horses. She had heard about Arnfeld's palace the way most people in Fenwick heard about it, in pieces, through travelers, and the occasional royal notice posted in the village square. Large, old. Built on a ridge above the Garn River, which curved around its eastern wall close enough that you could hear the water from the upper courtyard on quiet mornings. The reality of it, seen from the road at dusk on the 3rd day, was more severe than described. The stone was dark with age. The towers were built for function, not display. The whole structure had the look of something designed by people who had expected to be attacked and had prepared accordingly. The gate guards passed them through without ceremony. Inside, the welcome was what Faye had expected. A steward who could not quite conceal his opinion of her robes. A chamber that had been a storage room not long ago. Clean. but with the dimensions of a space someone had hurried to make habitable rather than comfortable. A tray of food left without explanation. She ate, checked the room's access to water and light, and noted that the window faced east, good for morning preparation work. She did not unpack fully, not yet. The steward returned before dark to bring her to the prince's chambers. She followed him through corridors that grew progressively warmer and better lit as they moved toward the family wing, past servants who glanced at her and quickly away, past 2 guards standing outside a heavy oak door who stepped aside when the steward nodded. The room was too warm. The fire had been built past comfort, past reason, the way people built fires when they were frightened and trying to compensate for it with heat. Thick curtains blocked the only window. The air sat heavy and still. Torin lay in the bed at the room's center, smaller than she had pictured him, his dark hair damp against the pillow. His eyes were open. They tracked to her immediately, with an alertness that surprised her given the shadows beneath them and the translucent quality of his skin. "Are you the healer?" he asked. "Yes. The last one cried when she left." He said it without judgment, simply as information. She tried to hide it, but I could tell. Faye set her bag on the table near the bed and began opening it. "I won't cry when I leave," she said. "How do you know?" "Because I haven't decided when I'm leaving yet." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but near one. She turned back to her bag and began laying out her tools, and as she worked, she let her senses open the way Edric had taught her, the way she still did instinctively at the start of every difficult case. Quiet the thinking. Let the wolf do what it was built for. She caught it within the first minute, not in the boy, around him. A thread of something that had no business being in a child's sick room, thin and almost buried under the familiar layers of illness and wood smoke and unwashed wool. Her wolf seized on it with a sharpness that was almost physical, not aggression, not alarm, but the precise, locked-in focus of recognition. Her grandmother had described it once, during a lesson about the northern highlands, about the plants that grew in the elevated cold where most healers never traveled. A pale powder, almost white, that accumulated slowly and mimicked natural illness so convincingly that even experienced practitioners could spend months treating the wrong thing. Faye's hands continued moving, steady and deliberate. She knew what was in this room. She knew, with the certainty that came not from training alone, but from the part of her that was wolf before it was anything else, what had been making Torin sick. She also knew that knowing and proving were 2 entirely different things, separated by the kind of distance that a frontier Omega with no title and no standing could not close on her word alone. If she walked out of this room right now and told the Alpha King what she suspected, she would be dismissed before she finished the sentence. She needed evidence, physical, undeniable, something that a court full of people with reason to disbelieve her could not argue away. She would build that first, carefully, without showing her hand. "Let's start with your breathing," she said to Torin, drawing the stool close to the bed. "Take a slow breath and tell me if it catches anywhere." He obeyed without complaint, watching her with those 2 alert eyes that had seen too many healers come through this room already. Behind her, the chamber door opened, the soft, controlled sound of someone choosing not to be heard. She did not turn around, but her wolf registered the presence in the doorway the way it registered everything, completely, immediately, without asking her permission first. She stayed focused on Torin. There was work to do, and she had learned long ago that the work was always the right place to start. The purge protocol required precision above comfort, which meant Faye spent her first full day in the palace doing things the court found undignified. She had Torin drink 4 preparations in sequence, spaced 2 hours apart, each one designed not to treat the symptoms directly, but to move through the system and begin clearing whatever was accumulating in the tissues. He complained about the taste of the second one, which she had expected, and asked what was in it, which she had not. "Ground root, dried moss from the riverbank, and something that will make you want to sleep," she told him. "Will I sleep?" "Probably." "Good." He drank the rest without further objection. He was an unusually reasonable child. She noted it the way she noted everything about her patients in those first days, not with particular warmth, but with the careful attention of someone who understood that resistance to treatment was its own kind of symptom. Torin did not resist. He watched her with those alert, shadows under the eyes, asked practical questions, and did what she asked. By midday, Isolde arrived. She came without announcement, which was her right. This was her stepson's chamber, and she was the Luna of the palace in which Faye was a guest. She was dressed simply for a woman of her position, which still meant more care than most people gave their formal occasions. Her hair was arranged without flaw. Her expression carried precisely the right amount of maternal concern. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, which was not a question. Not at all. Faye moved aside from the table to allow the Luna access to the room. Isolde went to Torin's bedside first, touched his forehead with the back of her hand, said something quiet and fond that was clearly intended for his ears rather than Faye's. Then she turned, and her eyes moved across the table where Faye's preparations were arranged. The flasks in their order, the small labeled pouches, the instruments she used for measuring. It was a brief look, unhurried, the kind of look that asked no questions and therefore raised none. "What is your method?" Isolde asked. Faye explained the purge protocol in terms a layperson could follow, which she had learned was the most effective approach with family members who needed to feel included in order not to obstruct. Isolde listened with visible attention. She asked 2 questions, both sensible, both phrased in a way that showed some familiarity with healing practices, more than a courtier typically would. She did not touch anything on the table. She stayed for perhaps half an hour. When she left, she thanked Faye for her patience and told Torin she would come again tomorrow. Faye watched the door close. Then she looked at the table. Everything was exactly where she had placed it. She was certain of that. She had an arrangement system that had become involuntary over years of practice, each item in a position relative to the others that she could read in a single glance. Nothing had been moved, but Isolde had spent 30 minutes looking at it. Faye turned back to Torin and picked up her measuring instrument. Her wolf had gone quiet in the specific way it went quiet when it was paying attention to something it had not yet named. The second day followed the same shape, with variations. Isolde came again, at a different hour, staying longer. She sat in the chair near the window while Faye worked, and she asked different questions about the sourcing of specific compounds, about the preparation of the evening draft, about how long sealed flasks remained stable once opened. All things a concerned family member might reasonably want to know. Faye answered each one clearly, without offering more than was asked. After Isolde left, she reorganized the table in a way that would look identical to any outside observer, but that she herself could read precisely. She knew now where every flask sat in relation to every other. She would know if anything shifted. She said nothing about this to anyone. On the 3rd day, Torin's fever dropped 2 degrees. It was the first measurable change since the illness began. The palace's senior steward happened to be in the corridor when Faye recorded it, and the look on his face, a complicated mixture of relief and the particular discomfort of someone who had underestimated a person and was now reckoning with that, told her the court had taken notice. She went back to work. By the 4th day, Torin sat up in bed without assistance for the first time in weeks. He made no production of it. He simply pushed himself upright, reached for the cup on the stand beside him, and drank without asking for help. And the fact that this was remarkable said more about how bad the preceding months had been than any account she had been given. She was recording measurements at the table when he spoke. "You're staying, aren't you?" Not quite a question. She recognized the phrasing, the specific flatness of a child who had been disappointed enough times to stop fully inflecting his hopes upward. "For now," she said. The others said that and left within the week. Faye set down her stylus. "I said it because the work isn't finished," she told him. "I don't have anywhere that needs me more urgently than this room." He considered this with the gravity he brought to most things. "Edric said you were the best he had trained. Edric is generous. He said it the way people say facts, not compliments." She picked the stylus back up. "Then I'll do my best to justify it." A small sound from the direction of the bed, then the quieter sound of him settling back against the pillow without being told to rest. Osric appeared in the doorway for the first time that same evening. Faye became aware of him through her wolf first, the thinking part of her catching up a moment later. She was at the table with her back to the door when the presence registered. and the quality of it was unlike anything else in the palace. Not the steward's brisk efficiency, not Isolde's calculated calm, something heavier and less contained, the kind of presence that a room reorganized itself around without the person having to do anything at all. She did not turn around immediately. She finished the measurement she was recording, placed the stylus down, and then looked over her shoulder. He was standing in the open doorway with one shoulder against the frame and his arms loose at his sides, not entering, not announcing himself. Watching Torin, who had fallen asleep an hour ago and was, for the first time in weeks, sleeping without audible distress. Osric's expression was difficult to read in the way that expressions become difficult when someone has spent years teaching themselves control. What she could read was the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man holding himself deliberately back from a room because he was afraid of disturbing something that had finally started working. She turned back to her table. He stood there for perhaps 10 minutes. Then his footsteps moved away down the corridor without a word. Her wolf responded in a way she did not immediately have words for. Not the sharpness she felt tracking Isolde's movements. Not the settled focus that came with Torin's treatment. Something quieter and more specific that registered his presence and then marked its absence when he left in a way she found faintly unreasonable, given that she had barely spoken to the man. She noted the shift the way she noted everything and set it aside for later examination. Later arrived in the early hours of the morning, when the palace was quiet enough that she could hear the river at the eastern wall, and she was lying awake running through the day's observations with the thoroughness that had always made sleep slow to find her. She reached the moment in the doorway and paused on it. She was an Omega. He was the Alpha King, bound by law and ceremony to the Luna of this palace. Whatever her wolf had registered might still be nothing more than instinct reading a dominant presence and finding, for reasons of its own, that the room felt different when he was in it. Biological, inconvenient. Not something she intended to build meaning around. Her grandmother had told her once, in the context of a difficult diagnosis, that the wolf completed its thinking before the woman started hers, and that the woman's most common mistake was working to undo what the wolf had already concluded. The advice had served her well for years. She was not certain it applied here. She set the thought aside and focused instead on the problem she was able to act on. The evidence was not arriving quickly enough. The initial trace she had caught on the first night was consistent with long, accumulated exposure, chronic, not recent. It pointed to a compound she had learned about through her grandmother's teaching, not through any formal record. A pale powder found in the elevated cold of the northern highlands, one that mimicked natural illness closely enough that experienced practitioners had spent months treating the wrong thing in the cases her grandmother had described. Frostbark. The name had surfaced in her memory the moment her wolf had locked on to that trace in Torin's chamber, arriving with the particular certainty that came not from formal study, but from years of accumulated instinct. She knew what it was. That was not the problem. The problem was that knowing and proving occupied entirely different ground, separated by a distance that a frontier Omega with no title and no standing could not cross on her word alone. If she walked to Osric's hall right now and told him what she believed was happening to his son, she would be removed from the palace before she finished speaking. What she needed was physical residue, something she could place in someone else's hands, something that would reach the question of what she had found before it was stopped by the question of who she was. The purge was working. She was certain of it. But what she was watching for, the crystalline sediment that the compound left behind as it was pushed out of the tissues, required time. Her best estimate was 4 to 5 more days before it appeared in sufficient concentration to be visible and undeniable. She could wait 4 days. She would have to. Osric came to the doorway again on the 7th evening. And the 8th. He never entered the room during those visits. He stood at the threshold, watching Torin sleep, and the visits were the kind of thing that went unacknowledged between them by unspoken agreement. He did not explain his presence, and she did not comment on it. And so they existed in the same space for those evening stretches in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. On the 8th evening, after he had been there perhaps 20 minutes, Torin's voice came from the bed, drowsy and slow with the evening draft. "Father." "You should be sleeping." Osric's voice was not what she had heard of it before. Lower, stripped of its public weight, with a texture that she suspected few people in the palace knew existed. "I was." A pause. "She made me better." Faye kept her eyes on the record sheet in front of her. She heard the quality of Osric's breathing change. A small shift, barely perceptible, the kind of adjustment a person made when something reached them before they could decide how to receive it. "Yes," he said. "Will she stay?" "Sleep, Torin." His footsteps moved away down the corridor. The door remained open a careful few inches, the way it had been each time, not closed off, not wide. Faye sat for a moment in the quiet that followed, listening to Torin's breathing slow back toward the deeper register of real sleep. Her wolf registered his departure before the corridor fell quiet, and what lingered afterward was no longer mere surprise. Recognition had entered it somewhere along the way. That was inconvenient. Nothing in the observable facts had changed. He was bonded to Isolde. That bond was a fact of pack law, as real and binding as any in their world. Whatever her wolf was doing with his presence in the doorway existed entirely outside any territory in which she was permitted to think about it seriously. The difficulty was that her wolf was not particularly interested in permissions. She closed the record sheet, stacked it with the others, and went to check on Torin's temperature before settling in for the night. On the 9th morning, she found that the latch on the door connecting her room to the small preparation space she had claimed as a supply storage had been disturbed. Not broken, not visibly forced. The kind of disturbance a careful, unhurried person could produce and then partially erase. The sort of thing that would go unnoticed by anyone not specifically watching for it. One of the smaller flasks had been moved a quarter-inch to the left. Faye stood looking at it for a long moment. Then she replaced the flask, walked to the window, and looked out at the courtyard below, where two of the palace's younger guards were changing positions in the morning mist. She had perhaps 4 days before the purge cycle reached the stage where the sediment she needed would appear. 4 days, while someone with access to her supplies and enough knowledge to move through them methodically was mapping every compound she owned. She needed the sediment. She needed it before whoever was moving her flasks understood how close she was to having it. She turned from the window, picked up her bag, and went to begin Torin's morning treatment. The shift in the court's temperature happened gradually, then all at once. For the first 2 days after Torin sat upright without help, the corridors outside his chamber had carried a different quality. Servants moving with less dread in their shoulders, lower voices at mealtimes, the steward losing some of the rigid efficiency that frightened men wore when they needed to look purposeful. Faye had noticed it without drawing attention to it. Progress had its own kind of gravity. People leaned toward it without meaning to. Then Isolde began talking. Not loudly, not with accusation or grievance in her voice. That was the craft of it. She spoke in the tones that powerful women in palaces had perfected over generations. The mild, wondering tones of someone simply thinking aloud, asking questions that carried no claim of their own and needed no answer because the damage was in the asking. She wondered, once at breakfast in the small dining room adjacent to Torin's chambers, whether frontier healers used the same care with children as with adult patients. She wondered, in the hearing of 2 maids and the old nurse, whether the particular route Faye had introduced to Torin's treatment that morning was not too stimulating for a body still in recovery. She asked Faye directly, on a morning when Osric stood close enough to hear, whether the pace of reducing the stronger compounds was based on established practice or on personal judgment. Each remark stood alone without weight. Together, they were a different thing entirely. Faye answered all of it plainly and without visible irritation, because visible irritation was what the questions were designed to produce. The defensive reaction of someone with something to conceal, the short temper that would play better in a servant's retelling than any denial she could offer. She knew how this worked. She had seen it used before, in smaller ways, against smaller targets. She kept her hands steady, and her voice even, and her attention on Torin. Torin was improving. That was the fact that nothing else could fully remove. By the 11th day, he had walked to the window twice without help. By the 12th, he had sat beside it for an hour while Faye worked at the table, asking her the names of plants she carried in her bag with the focused interrogation of a child who had been bedridden for months and intended to make up for it with questions. What's that one? Dried willow bark. What does it do? Reduces fever when made into a tea. What about that one? That one tastes worse than it looks, and you will not be drinking it. He accepted this without argument, which meant he filed it away for later. She had learned to read the difference between the questions he asked to know and the questions he asked to build towards something else. He reminded her, in that particular way, of Edric, who had spent years answering questions he knew were doorways to other questions. She wondered, occasionally, what kind of man Torin would become. Then she reminded herself that his becoming that man depended on her keeping him alive long enough to grow into it. And she returned to work. On the 13th day, the evidence arrived. She had been watching for it since the 5th day of the purge cycle, when the cleaning cloths first showed traces of the discharge that accompanied the compound moving through the tissues. Most of what came out in those early days was indistinct. Residue that could have been attributed to a dozen things. Nothing she could place in another person's hands and defend with certainty. She had waited. She had been careful with the cloth changes, had kept each batch separate, had washed her own instruments each time rather than leaving them for the nurse. That morning, Torin's overnight coughing had been worse than the previous nights, and the cloths from the early hour change were heavier than usual. She brought the basin into the preparation room before dawn, when the corridor was empty, and rinsed the first cloth in clear water. And there it was. Not much. Enough. The granules were small enough that she would have missed them if she hadn't known to look. Pale, almost translucent, catching the gray light from the window with a dry glitter that had no business being on a linen cloth rinsed in clean water. She lifted the cloth and held it at the angle her grandmother had described. The sediment remained. It did not dissolve. It caught and held the light. Frostbark, when the body finally began forcing it outward, left exactly this. She had never seen it herself before today, but she knew the description the way she knew every lesson her grandmother had ever pressed into her with the particular urgency of information meant to survive past the teacher. She did not waste time standing over it. She scraped the sediment onto the flattest instrument from her case and transferred it to the smallest ceramic dish she carried. Shallow-lipped, white inside, designed to show fine residue without ambiguity. She worked quickly and without rushing, which was its own kind of discipline. Then she set the dish on the high shelf above the window, covered it with a folded cloth, and went to assess the remaining basins. The second cloth yielded a smaller amount, the third less still. Consistent with how the compound distributed through the body as it cleared, heavier in the first discharge, tapering after. By the time the morning light had strengthened enough to read by, she had a dish with visible, undeniable physical residue, sourced directly from the prince's own body, showing that whatever had been making him ill was not a natural sickness rooted in his lungs. She needed Edric. He was the only person in this building whose word would reach Osric before Isolde's did. An itinerant healer of 50 years standing, known beyond the palace grounds, with no stake in court politics and no bond of loyalty that could be questioned. If she brought him the dish, if he looked at it and confirmed what it was, there was a path through this room that did not require her word alone. She was already reaching for her cloak when someone knocked at the preparation room door. She turned. The sound had come from the side entrance, the small door that connected the preparation room to the service corridor, not the main door to the hallway. Only 2 people used that entrance with any regularity. One was the nurse. The other was Isolde. Faye set her cloak down and opened the door. It was not Isolde. It was the younger of the 2 chambermaids who had been assigned to Torin's care. A thin, quiet girl who had come with Isolde's household from the northern estates. She kept her eyes low when she spoke, which told Faye very little, except that she had been told to keep them low. "The Luna asks that you come to the prince's chamber for the midday preparation," she said. "His Majesty will be present." Faye looked at the maid for a moment. "At what hour?" "Now, if you're ready." The preparation that she carried to the midday treatment was one she had made the evening before. The central binder that acted as the base for Torin's afternoon medicine, the one that had been most precisely calibrated through the 2 weeks of purge work. She had mixed it at sunset, sealed it, and placed it on the second shelf from the top, on the left side of the preparation table. She crossed to the shelf. The flask stood where she had left it. At a glance, it was exactly as she had prepared it. She lifted it and tilted it once in the gray morning light. The movement of the liquid inside was wrong, not dramatically, not in a way that would register to anyone who had not spent 11 years developing the kind of attention to viscosity and surface behavior that most healers never bothered with. But she had, and it did. The preparation she had mixed the evening before moved slightly slower, carried slightly more suspension. This was thinner, more uniform. She uncorked it and brought it to her nose. Beneath the familiar resin of the base compound, placed there with enough accuracy to make the substitution survivable to casual inspection, was something that did not belong, sharper. A secondary edge she had used clinically once, years ago, in a specific context that had nothing to do with a child's recovering lungs. Nothing lethal at moderate dose. At the dose she would have introduced into Torin's midday treatment, it would have set his progress back by at least a week, producing symptoms that looked precisely like a natural relapse. A relapse that would have occurred immediately after her methods began drawing scrutiny. Her hands remained steady. The thinking part of her fell silent for a moment, while she stood with the flask open and breathed through what had been built around her in the hours she had slept. Then she replaced the stopper, picked up the ceramic dish from the high shelf, held both items at once, and went to the prince's chamber. Osric was standing near the window when she entered. He was not alone. Isolde sat in the chair beside Torin's bed, one hand resting near the boy's foot, through the blanket in a posture of careful proximity. The council steward stood near the hearth. A man in a formal coat, whose function Faye could read from his bearing, if not his name, occupied the far corner, council adjutant, or something close to it. 2 guards remained inside the door. Too many people for a routine preparation. Torin was awake, sitting up, watching the room with the watchfulness of a child who had been ill long enough to understand that adults gathered in numbers when something was about to be decided about him. Faye set both items on the side table and did not begin unpacking. Isolde spoke first, before anyone had the chance to establish a different tone. "Thank you for coming." Her voice was the same as always, unhurried, sorrowful in its patience. "I asked His Majesty to be present because I have been troubled by something for the past few days, and I didn't feel it was right to hold my concerns back any longer." Faye looked at Osric. He was watching her. His jaw was set, and his eyes carried the amber sharpness that she had learned marked high alertness in him, the wolf close to the surface. "Then let's address the concerns," Faye said. Isolde rose from the chair. She moved to the preparation table and stood near it without touching anything. "I want to be fair," she said to the room, not to Faye specifically. "I have watched this healer's methods closely because it is my duty to watch, and I have tried to ask questions rather than draw conclusions. But I am no longer able to ignore what I have seen." "What have you seen?" the councilman asked. Isolde reached to the table and lifted the second flask from the left, not the substituted one, but a different bottle, one that Faye did not use for the midday treatment, one that sat slightly apart from the others because it contained a compound used only for drawing out deep tissue swelling, never taken internally, far too concentrated for direct ingestion. She held it up. "This bottle has been moved repeatedly over the past 5 days," Isolde said. "Placed in different positions on the table, twice I found it near the preparations intended for the prince's morning treatment." Faye kept her voice flat. "It was moved because I needed access to different parts of the table at different hours. It belongs on the left side. It is on the left side." "This morning," Isolde continued, without acknowledging the interruption, "I came to collect the overnight cloths before the nurse arrived because I wished to see them myself. I found that 3 of the cloths had been removed from the basin already. Because I removed them." Faye placed one hand on the ceramic dish, "to examine what they contained." "And what did you find?" "I will show you." She uncovered the dish and held it toward the room. The sediment sat in the shallow white interior, small, pale, visible in the morning light. "This is frostbark residue," she said. "It was present in the discharge from the morning cloths. Your son has not been suffering from a natural sickness. He has been poisoned." The word dropped into the room and sat there. The steward's face went careful. The councilman moved one step closer, almost involuntarily. Torin sat fully upright in the bed. Osric's eyes went to the dish. For the span of 3 seconds, something moved through his expression, an uncertainty that was also a hunger, the particular look of a man who wanted very badly to believe one thing and was watching a different thing become possible. Then Isolde spoke. "Forgive me," she said, and her tone was grief wearing the costume of apology. "But I need to understand. You are saying that my stepson was poisoned, that this has been occurring for months, that no one else identified it." She paused. "And you are producing this evidence now, today, after being questioned about your methods, after your supplies were noted to be disturbed, after I expressed concern to His Majesty." "I found it this morning." This morning. She did not inflect it as disbelief. She did not need to. How very timely. Faye turned to face her fully. "Show me someone else who could have found it." "I could not," Isolde said. "I am not a healer. But then, neither am I the person whose compounds have been shifted repeatedly in ways that suggest something was being removed from or added to the preparation room without clear purpose." She looked at Osric. "I delayed telling you because I wanted to be certain. I am certain now." Osric had not looked away from Faye during any of this. That was the most difficult part of it. Not his silence, but the quality of his attention, which had shifted since she had entered the room. It was the attention of a man watching the two accounts against each other, trying to find solid ground, and finding that neither side offered footing that his wolf could verify. His bond with Isolde was there. Faye could not see it, but she could read its effect the way she read other unseen forces. In the slight lean of his shoulder toward the Luna's voice, in the way his instinct was interfered with every time it reached toward the dish in Faye's hand and then retreated. A political bond was not the same as a mate bond. It did not carry the same warmth or certainty, but it carried weight, and it sat between him and clarity like smoke between him and a window. "The flask," Faye said. She lifted the substituted bottle and held it beside the dish. "This is not what I prepared yesterday. Someone replaced it. If you have Edric examine both the original residue and this flask, he will confirm what I am telling you. The healer Edric is elderly and has spent much of his time these past days in the lower courtyard," Isolde said. "He has not been present in the preparation room. He doesn't need to have been present. He needs to be brought a flask and asked what is in it." "And if the flask has been tampered with," Isolde said very quietly, "as you claim, who had access to your preparation room, if not you?" Torin made a sound from the bed. Short, sharp. His hands had gone flat on the blanket. Osric moved, not toward Faye. Away from the window, a repositioning that changed the geometry of the room, put him between the two accounts in a way that was physical as well as deliberate. His amber eyes went to Torin first. The boy's face had the color that meant the effort of sitting upright was becoming costly. Whatever this room was doing to Torin, it was being done in front of the child it was meant to decide the fate of. "This ends now," Osric said. Faye looked at him. "Your preparation will not be used today," he said. "The sediment dish and the substituted flask will be sealed for Edric. Everything else will be surrendered to the steward until I have spoken with Edric and with the council. You will remain within the eastern rooms." Faye did not move for a moment. "If you stop the purge cycle now," she said, "what has been building in him will reverse. The sediment proves the compound is clearing. Stop the treatment, and it accumulates again. You have my answer. Torin will. You have my answer." From the bed, Torin's voice came, smaller than it had been in days. "Faye." She looked at him. He was watching her with the expression of a child who had learned, through months of too much adult confusion around a bed he could not leave, that sometimes the people who helped you were removed before the helping was finished. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she set the flask and the covered dish both on the table with care, not with the careless placement of someone who had given up, but with the precision of someone who had placed something where it would be found later. She looked at Osric one final time. His expression had the particular set of a man who had made a decision and was already beginning to feel the cost of it before the cost had fully arrived. Faye held her tongue on the things that would not help. She had learned that too, over years in rooms where being right was not always the thing that determined what happened next. She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Torin said nothing more. She heard his breathing. Steadier than it had been even 3 days ago, even now. The purge still working at the edges, the progress still present, even in the room where it was being dismissed. She carried that with her into the corridor, where 2 guards fell into step at her sides without being told, and the eastern rooms waited at the end of a hallway she had not yet learned to read in the dark. The guards did not speak to her on the way to the river. That was fine. Faye had nothing she needed to say to them. They were doing what they had been told to do, walking her through the outer yard and down the stone path that ran along the inside of the eastern wall toward the lower gate. And she spent the walk doing what she had learned to do with useless feeling, setting it aside and looking instead at what was still actionable. What was still actionable was not much. The ceramic dish was on the side table where she had placed it. Edric was somewhere in the building. The purge cycle was on its 13th day, and the sediment she had collected this morning meant the compound was actively clearing, which meant Torin's body was doing the work it needed to do, which meant stopping the treatment now was the most dangerous thing Osric could have ordered, short of harm done on purpose. She was thinking through what, if anything, Edric could do with that information before morning, when the sound of the river grew louder and she understood they were not taking her to the eastern rooms. They were taking her to the bank. The lower gate opened onto a path that dropped away from the palace wall toward the Garn, and in the dark, the river was a sound before it was a sight, low and continuous, absorbing the smaller sounds of the night around it. The torch 2 of the guards carried threw orange shapes on the water and on the figure standing at its edge. Osric. He had beaten them there, or had never gone back inside after dismissing her from the chamber. He stood with his back to her, and the river directly before him. And at his feet sat everything he had removed from the treatment cycle, and did not trust to go back into Torin's body. Her bag. Her case. The remaining sealed flasks arranged on the flat stone of the bank, with the rough care of a man who had made a decision, and was now carrying it through. The sediment dish was not among them. Neither was the substituted flask. He reached for the first flask without turning around. "Stop!" The word came out before deliberation finished. Not a plea, not argument, just the instinctive assertion of someone watching something irreversible begin. Those compounds took weeks to prepare. If Torin's cycle doesn't complete, everything he's cleared will... He threw the flask. The dark glass caught the torchlight for the length of half a breath, and then the current took it, the way the current took everything that entered it, without differentiation or ceremony. The small splash was disproportionately quiet for what it cost. Faye stopped speaking. She watched the second flask follow the first, then the third, then the small linen pouches that held the dried compounds she had spent 2 weeks building from materials available in the frontier. The river absorbed each one. She counted them without meaning to, the way the mind fixes on measurement when everything else is past the point of managing. "You are making a mistake," she said. He said nothing. The sediment is physical evidence. It came from his body this morning. If you have Edric examine it, he will examine it. He threw another flask. He will examine the sediment and the substituted bottle before dawn. But I will not put another unverified compound into my son tonight, and you are no longer the one treating him. Then who will? Silence, except the river. "Who do you have?" Faye said, and she kept her voice even with the effort that calm always cost in the moments when it mattered most. Who is capable of identifying what is in his system and continuing what the purge started? Name them. He turned then, for the first time since she had come down the path. The torchlight moved across his face, picking out the line of his jaw and the amber of his eyes and the particular quality in his expression that she had come to recognize as the surface beneath which something with more texture lived. The bond with Isolde pressed its interference between his instinct and its conclusions. She could read the effect of it even if she could not see it directly, the way you read wind by what it moves. "You are the one who produced a powder this morning as evidence and accused the Luna of poisoning her stepson," he said, in front of the council, in front of whoever needed to hear it, in front of my son. That landed differently. She felt the weight of it. "I know," she said. "I would have chosen otherwise if the room had allowed it." Something moved in his face. Not softening. The wrong word entirely. A fracture, small and immediately controlled, in the wall that anger built faster and easier than anything else in a man who'd had reason for it. He looked away from her and threw the last flask. The pouches followed. The case she had carried from Fenwick went next, the leather hitting the water flat and beginning to sink at the weight of the instruments inside. Then the bag itself, stripped of the tools she had left on the preparation table and carrying only the empty cloth wrappings. The river took it all with the same indifference it had shown everything else. "The eastern border," he said to the guards, "before first light." She said nothing more. The moment for speech had passed, and she understood its passage precisely. Not as defeat, but as the closing of one route among others. She turned and walked with the guards back up the path toward the lower gate, and the sound of the river followed her until the wall came between them. She did not look back. The journey east ran 3 days through the lower territory of Arnfeld, along the road that connected the palace district to the frontier settlements. The guards rode, and she rode with them, which meant a pace faster than she would have chosen on her own, and a silence she found she did not mind. She used the first day to grieve, because grief was functional when given its proper allotment of time, and became corrosive when denied it. She let herself feel the cold of the morning she had left, and the weight of Torrin's face when she had walked to the door, and the particular bitterness of having been closer than she had ever been, in any case, to something that mattered. And then she set it down the way she set down useful feeling when it had finished being useful and began to be noise. The second day, she thought. She rebuilt the preparation room in her mind with the precision of someone who had learned that memory was its own kind of instrument. Every flask, every shelf, the arrangement she had used, and the deliberate variations she had introduced after finding the latch disturbed. The morning she had uncorked the substituted bottle and found the wrong viscosity, the secondary edge beneath the familiar resin. She thought about the questions Isolde had asked across the 2 weeks, not their content, which had been plausible and deniable on its own, but their sequence. The progression from what does each compound do to how long does it remain stable to what would the morning treatment contain on a day when the purge cycle reached its peak. A map drawn through questions, drawn in plain sight. She thought about what the substituted compound would have done to Torrin at the dose she would have administered. Not lethal. That was the part she kept returning to. Not because it softened anything, but because it told her something about the architecture of the plan. The substitute would have set him back. A week of apparent relapse, the recovery erased, the frontier healer's methods clearly producing harm. It would not have killed him. Not this time. The thing in his system that had been slowly accumulating for months. That was what would kill him, in time, if the purge was not completed. The substitute was not meant to kill. It was meant to discredit. Discredit first. Then, once Faye was gone, and the purge treatment was gone, and the boy was still getting worse, the decline could continue at whatever pace Isolde required. By the end of the second day's riding, Faye had the complete shape of it in her mind, and what she felt was not the kind of helpless dread that invited paralysis. It was the clean, cold anger of a person who understood a mechanism precisely and was already working out the counter. She needed Edric. She needed the sediment she had placed on the preparation table, which was either still there or had been removed. She needed the physical confirmation that a man of Edric's standing could provide in a room with Osric, without her present to be dismissed or doubted. The question was whether any of that would happen before Torrin ran out of time. On the third day, the guards brought her to the first substantial village on the eastern border, a settlement called Rest, used primarily for farming and river trade, large enough to have a healer's house. The senior guard, who had said perhaps 40 words to her across the journey, told her she was not to cross back into the palace district. "I understand," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had just realized he was delivering a sentence to someone who was not afraid of it. Then he left, and she went to find the healer. The healer of Rest was an old woman named Doran, who had seen enough in her years along the frontier that a stranger arriving at her door before midday, asking to use her preparation table, was not a situation that required much adjustment. Faye paid with the coin she kept in the inner pocket of her robe. Edric had given it to her before she left Fenwick, saying only that capable people should always have resources that did not depend on the goodwill of their employers. And Doran showed her the table and did not ask unnecessary questions. Faye began rebuilding from what the local area offered. Some compounds she could reproduce. Others required materials that did not grow in this part of the territory and could not be sourced in time. She worked with what she had, methodically, and she did not let herself think about whether she was building something that would arrive in time to be used. She was working late in the second evening at the table when her wolf went still in the way it went still before something significant entered its range. She set down the mortar. Waited. At the palace, Torin collapsed before the second morning. The nurse found him at dawn, still in the bed, not thrashing, not making the sounds he had made during the worst of the fever spikes. Simply wrong. Breathing wrong. The color gone from his face in a way that was different from the pale weakness of the past months, which had at least been alive in its quality. This was something going quiet. 3 of the palace's available healers cycled through the chamber in the space of 2 hours. They worked against symptoms they could not source to a cause, because the cause was not a natural process moving through natural channels. The purge cycle, interrupted on its 13th day, had stopped the clearing. What Faye's treatment had been fighting outward was now working inward again, undisturbed, accumulating in the tissues of a child whose own healing capacity had been suppressed beneath months of slow poisoning. The healers conferred in the corridor and used words like stabilize and support and wait, which were the words healers used when they did not have the word that mattered. Edric heard about Torin's collapse from the steward's assistant, who had been going room to room looking for anything that might help, and had arrived at the old healer's door with the combined desperation of someone who had exhausted all the authorized options and was now trying the ones he had been told to ignore. Edric asked for the room. It was not a request in the way that most requests were. He said it in the tone that had come from 50 years of standing in chambers where people were choosing between their comfort and someone's survival. And it had the effect such a tone produced on anyone who had not fully decided to choose their comfort. The nurse left. The remaining healer gathered her materials without protest. Even the senior guard stepped out and pulled the door. Edric sat with Torin for a long time. He worked the way he had always worked, slowly, without the haste that caused the kind of errors that were easy to miss and costly to correct. He had asked for a lamp to be placed close to the bed, and in its steady light, he examined the boy with the full scope of senses available to him, wolf and experience together, the way he had taught Faye to do when she was small enough to sit on the work table at his side. The trace was faint. Days of the purge cycle had pushed a significant amount of the compound outward before the treatment stopped, and what remained was more dispersed than when Faye had first identified it. But it was there. He knew it the moment his wolf locked on it, not with surprise, because he had been thinking about this case for 2 weeks with the nagging feeling of someone walking past a detail they had not fully resolved. And this was the detail. He knew what the compound was. He knew where it grew. He had treated one exposure case 40 years ago in a village at the edge of the northern highlands. He had not forgotten it because it was the kind of case that did not permit forgetting. He came out of the room and found Osric waiting in the corridor. The Alpha King had not been sleeping. That was plain enough from his face and from the quality of his stillness, which was the stillness of someone who had been standing in one place, making himself not move for hours. His eyes went to Edric immediately and read the old man's expression with the sharpness that came from having spent the night watching the only fact that mattered get worse. "Tell me," Osric said. Edric told him. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, without gentleness as a strategy, without harshness as a mercy, just the facts in their order. The compound, its properties, the rate at which it accumulated in young tissue over long exposure, where it grew, where it did not grow, which was every part of this territory except a specific northern region from which exactly one person in this palace had come with exactly one sealed chest that had not been opened before the household staff. He said it without naming Isolde. He said the facts and let the facts do their work, the way he had done in difficult rooms for 50 years. And he watched Osric's face as the picture assembled itself. The way a man's expression changes, not when he is told the conclusion, but when he reaches it himself, through the evidence, by the route that cannot be argued away because it was built inside his own understanding. He watched Osric understand what he had thrown into the river. The silence that followed, was not the silence of inaction. It had the density of something being decided at a level below speech. "Where is she?" Osric said. "The eastern border by now." "Which settlement?" "The road to the frontier from the lower gate runs through Rest first." Osric was already moving down the corridor before the sentence ended. Edric did not call after him. He turned back to the chamber door, knocked once, and went back in to sit with Torin. There was work to do. Faye heard him before she saw him. Her wolf had gone still 20 minutes earlier at the outer edge of his range. She had noted it, filed it, continued measuring the compound she was building on Doran's table. Then, the hoofbeats, singular and fast, coming off the road and slowing in the yard outside the healer's house. Then silence. Then footsteps on the stone outside, deliberate and tired in the way that hours of hard riding made deliberate things tired. The door opened. He stood in the threshold of Doran's preparation room, filling the space the way he filled most spaces he entered. Not through effort, but through the simple fact of what he was, which was the kind of man that rooms acknowledged whether or not they were asked to. He had ridden hard. His coat was dark with the cold, and his hair sat against his forehead with the flattened quality of a long journey. His amber eyes went to her first, then to the table, then back to her face. Whatever he had come to say, he had not yet made it into words. Her wolf did not do the quiet pressing thing it had done in the evenings at the palace. It did something different, something larger and less easy to set aside, a recognition that came from the part of her that did not deal in manageable categories, pressing forward with the force of something that had been held back for 2 weeks by the presence of a bond that had now, in some way she could feel even across the room, changed its quality. The interference that had sat between his instinct and its conclusions was thinner. Not gone. Thinner. She did not move from the table. "Edric found the frost bark," she said. It was not a question. "Yes. How is Torin?" "Deteriorating." The word came out with the flat pressure of a man stating something that was costing him to state. "We need to get back." Faye looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the river, about the weight of the leather bag hitting the water, about the specific quality of his voice when he had said, "You have my answer," and refused to hear her, and about Torin's face in the doorway of the chamber as she walked out. She set down the measuring cup. "I'll go back," she said. "I want my preparation room restored to the condition it was in before anyone entered it. I want the ability to work without the steward or anyone from Isolde's household within the room during treatment hours. And I want Edric present for the first examination when we arrive." Something moved across his face. Not the reaction of a king being given conditions. The reaction of a man who had ridden at speed for hours to find someone he had wronged and was now discovering she was capable of naming the terms of her return. "Agreed," he said. The word cost him something. She could see it did. She did not make it easier for him to spend it. "Then I'm ready," she said, and reached for her cloak. The ride back took longer than the ride out. Osric set a pace that accounted for the fact that Faye was not a guard trained for long distances, and she did not remark on this, and neither did he. The road from Rest to the Palace District ran back through the same territory she had crossed 3 days earlier in the opposite direction. And in the pale morning light, it looked different. Not better or worse, just the difference between seeing a thing while you are being sent away from it and seeing it while you are moving towards something unresolved. She had not cried on the journey east. She did not cry on the journey back. She was not certain what she felt exactly, which was unusual enough to occupy part of her attention across the first hours of riding. The anger was still present. The satisfaction of having been right, which she had never been able to feel cleanly because being right had never once stopped anyone from dismissing her. The particular exhaustion that followed the kind of days where everything costs more than it should. And underneath those things, something she kept turning toward and then away from again. The mate bond had broken its surface in Doran's preparation room, and she had felt it with her whole body. Not the faint pressing quality she had experienced in the evenings at the palace, the thing she had been able to categorize as proximity response and set aside with reasonable success. This had been different. This had the force of something that had been held at distance for too long being released all at once. A recognition that moved through her wolf and her chest and the backs of her hands at the same time. impossible to name as anything less specific than what it was. She had looked at him across Doran's table, and her wolf had said, "There." Simply that, without argument or qualification. There. She had not acted on it. There was too much unresolved between them for acting on it to mean anything worth keeping. And she had learned early that the things worth keeping required ground solid enough to hold them. What existed between her and Osric right now was not solid ground. It was the beginning of the question of whether solid ground was possible, which was a different thing entirely. She rode and thought about Torin and did not look at Osric more than the road required. He rode beside her without speaking, which she appreciated. He was not a man who filled silence with noise, which was one of the few things she could say in his favor that did not come complicated by the rest of it. Whatever he was carrying across that road, guilt, she imagined, and something heavier, he carried it without making it her burden to manage. By the time the palace ridge came into view, the morning had fully arrived, and the Garn was visible below the eastern wall, moving as it always moved. She did not look at the bank. The preparation room had been restored before their return. She could not tell who had done it. The steward, probably, working from an instruction delivered at speed. Every flask that remained after the search had been placed back in its approximate position, which was close, but not correct, and she spent the first 20 minutes adjusting the arrangement by hand while Edric stood in the doorway and let her work. "The sediment dish," she said, "on the high shelf. I checked it myself before you arrived." She reached for it, still covered. She lifted the cloth and looked at the pale granules in the white ceramic and felt the specific relief of a thing not destroyed. "How bad is he?" she said. "Better than he was at dawn." "Not good." The cycle was interrupted on day 13. If we resume the purge today, we lose some of the clearance that occurred in the past 2 weeks. I'll need to recalibrate the dosing. I know. She put the cloth back over the dish and moved to assess what remained on the shelves. Several of the compounds she had built up were gone, thrown into the river or removed during the search. What remained was workable. She would need to rebuild some things from the base materials, which would take time she preferred not to spend. But it was possible. Edric watched her take inventory. "You negotiated conditions," he said. "I did." "Good." A pause. "He agreed to all of them." She looked up briefly. "Yes. That means something. It means he needs Torin treated." She went back to the inventory. "I'm not prepared to assign it more weight than that yet." Edric made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, which was a sound she remembered from years of being his student and finding it equally frustrating at 26 as she had at 12. "Go and sit down somewhere," she told him. "I'll call you when I need you for the examination." He went without protest, which told her how tired he actually was. Torin was awake when she entered the chamber. He was not sitting up. He was lying on his back with his eyes toward the ceiling, and the color he had been building over the past 2 weeks had retreated back to the exhausted pallor she had found him in on her first night. His breathing had the careful quality of someone conserving effort, shallow, measured, deliberate. His eyes moved to the doorway when she came in. He did not speak immediately. He watched her cross the room and set her tray on the table and begin laying out what she needed. And the quality of his watching was different from the days before the chamber confrontation. He had witnessed that room. He was a child who stored things without comment and retrieved them later. And she did not know yet what he had stored from the sight of the adults around him, choosing their accounts over his welfare. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." "You said for now." She stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "I came back," she said. "That is what matters." He held her gaze for a moment in the way he held most things, assessing, not performing. Then he let out a slow breath that was almost but not quite a sigh. "My chest hurts when I breathe deep." "I know. That will ease. But I need you to do something uncomfortable first." "The bitter one again?" "Worse than the bitter one." He closed his eyes briefly. "Fine." She worked for 2 hours, recalibrating the purge for a system that had partially reversed during the interruption. Edric came when she called and examined Torin with her, confirming the compound's current distribution and helping her adjust the dosing by degree. The boy cooperated with a weary patience that said everything about how many months he had spent cooperating with things that had not helped him. By midday, His breathing had eased. By afternoon, the fever had dropped. She sat at the table long after Edric left and recorded every measurement with the thoroughness of someone who intended this record to be complete, regardless of what happened next. And she listened to Torrin sleep with the steadier, deeper sound of a child whose body had stopped spending all its resources on fighting something it could not identify. The door opened quietly at some point in the early evening. She did not need to look up to know who it was. Osric came in further than he had ever come during the threshold evenings, not to the bed, but to the center of the room, stopping near the table with his hands at his sides. He looked at his son's sleeping face for a long moment, and whatever moved through his expression then was the kind of thing that happened when fear and relief arrived at the same time and found there was not enough room in a person for both of them cleanly. Then he looked at Faye. The mate bond responded to the direct attention the way it had been responding to his presence since the preparation room in Rest, fully, without the interference that had distorted it for the weeks she had worked in this palace. The political bond with Isolde was not broken yet, but it had thinned to the point of transparency, and through it she could feel the quality of what was actually there. Not the muffled signal she had been reading sideways for 2 weeks. The thing itself. Her wolf said the same thing it had said in Rest. She kept her hands still on the record sheet. He's stabilizing, she said. I know, Edric told me. A pause. He'll recover fully? If the cycle completes without interruption. Osric received this without visible reaction. Then he said, I owe you. Not now, she said, quietly, without anger. There is time for that later. For now, it will make the work harder. He was silent for a moment. She had the sense that he had prepared something and was now putting it away. Not because it was unwanted, but because the timing was wrong, and he understood timing well enough to recognize when he was being told so. Then later, he said. Later, she agreed. He looked at Torrin once more. The boy's dark hair against the pillow, the steadier color in his face that was still not what it should be, but was no longer frightening. And then, he left. The door closed with the same careful fraction of an inch he had always left it. Faye looked at the space where he had stood. Her wolf held the recognition for a moment longer, then settled. She turned back to the record sheet and finished the notation she had started before he arrived. The search of Isolde's chambers happened the following morning. Osric ordered it without announcement. He brought Edric and the council adjutant and 2 of the senior guards, and he did not tell Isolde in advance, which was both his right as Alpha King and a practical decision. The kind of evidence that could be moved had every reason to be moved if its owner knew to expect a search. Faye was not present. She was with Torrin where she needed to be, and she heard the account of it from Edric that afternoon. The frostbark was found first. Not hidden with any particular care, stored in the locked chest that Isolde had brought with her household from the northern estates. The chest whose contents had not been catalogued when she arrived, because cataloging Aluna's personal effects was not standard practice. The chest contained several sealed compartments, and in the third one, a quantity of pale gray powder sat in a cloth bag, unlabeled in an amount that could not be explained by any medical purpose a person might claim in passing. The correspondence came next. Letters from Isolde's family on the northern estates, filed in order and dated across the past 14 months. The early ones were family communications of the ordinary kind, property matters, seasonal accounts, social news from the Highlands. Then, beginning 8 months ago, requests. Specific requests, phrased in the oblique language that families used when they were not certain how directly they could write to one another through a courier. Requests for particular dried goods that did not appear in any kitchen record of the palace. Requests that aligned, in their dates, with the intervals at which Torrin's symptoms had worsened. The family had sent what was requested. The evidence of the correspondence stopped short of naming what was being sent or why. It was damning by pattern and timing rather than by explicit statement. Sufficient, not comfortable. The third thing was the most difficult. Tucked into the lining of a secondary case that held Isolde's personal documents was a small journal, its cover unremarkable, its pages written in a careful, practiced hand. It was not a confessional. It was not an account of intent or remorse or any of the things a guilty document sometimes contained. It was a record. Dates, observations, notations about response and adjustment that read exactly as a healer's dosage log read. Clinical, precise, oriented entirely toward outcome. The outcome being the management of a slow decline. Edric told Faye this with the flat steadiness of a man who had seen the worst of what people were capable of too many times to be destroyed by it, though never too many times to stop being troubled by it. She listened without speaking until he was finished. "Did Osric read it?" she said. "He read enough of it." She thought about the quality of what she had seen in Osric's face at the river, the night he had thrown everything into the current. The fracture, small and immediately controlled, that she had read in his expression before the anger closed over it. She thought about what it would cost a man to read something like that journal, written in his Luna's hand, with his son's name and the name of his son's mother threaded through the clinical observations. "Is he all right?" she asked. Edric looked at her over his folded hands. "He's managing. That is not what I asked." "No," Edric said. "He is not all right. He is doing what needs to be done, which is different." She nodded and said nothing more. The formal dissolution of the bond between Osric and Isolde took place 3 days after the search. It was convened in the Great Hall with the full council present, which was procedure for any action that altered the formal pact structure at the highest level. Isolde stood through it with the stillness of a woman who had calculated every contingency except the one that had actually arrived, and the expression on her face was not fear and was not grief. It was closer to the expression of someone watching a game end badly who was already thinking about something else entirely. The bond was not severed in the way that mattered. She and Osric had never been true mates, and the political binding that had connected them could not be unmade the way a true bond could. What could be done, under pact law, was the formal revocation of her title and standing within the pact structure. What could be done was exile. Poisoning the heir of the Alpha King had no precedent of clemency, because it had never happened before in a way that produced a living heir to be consulted. The council deliberated for 40 minutes. The outcome was not in question. Isolde was given 1 day to gather what could be carried. The household she had brought from the northern estates was permitted to accompany her. The chest with the locked compartments was not. She did not speak to Faye before she left, which Faye did not consider a loss. There were things she might have said if the opportunity had presented itself, but she had thought about it and decided that most of them would not have served any purpose, that the evidence had not already served more cleanly. She was with Torin when the gates closed behind Isolde's party. He was sitting in the chair by the window with boots on, the boots he had asked for weeks ago, watching the courtyard below. He was not watching the gates. He was watching the fountain at the center of the yard where 2 sparrows had found something worth investigating in the stone basin. "She's gone," he said. Not a question. "Yes. Are you staying now?" Faye sat on the edge of the table and looked at him, the thin angles of his face still carrying the evidence of months of slow harm, but the color settling back in, the eyes sharper, the presence of him taking up more of the room than it had even a week ago. "I'm staying until the cycle is complete," she said. 6 more weeks, roughly. "And after?" "After is after." She paused. "But I'm not planning to go anywhere you need me not to go." He thought about this in the particular way he thought about things that he wanted to accept and was making sure he was not accepting them too quickly. Then he looked back at the sparrows. "Good," he said, and the flatness of it was deliberate. The studied neutrality of a 7-year-old trying very hard not to show that the answer mattered. She let him have it. The right of blood and name was held 12 weeks later, on a morning in late autumn when the garn was running high and the courtyard oaks had turned the deep red gold of the season. Torin walked into the great hall under his own power, in clothes that fit him properly for the first time in nearly a year, and stood before the gathered council of alphas with the serious attention he brought to everything and submitted to the ceremony with patience that most of the assembled alphas noted afterward with impressed surprise. He was 7 now, well past the date on which the rite should originally have been performed, and he had the particular quality of a child who had been made older by difficulty and was not resentful of the process. His name was spoken aloud by his father. The council witnessed. The record was sealed. When it was done, Torin found Faye in the small corridor off the main hall where she had been waiting, and he told her in a matter-of-fact tone that the oldest of the council alphas had hair coming out of his ears, and that he had spent the entire ceremony trying not to look at it. She told him that was probably a skill that would serve him well in council for the rest of his life, and that he had better get used to not looking at things. He agreed that this was probably true, and went to find something to eat. The conversation with Osric happened that evening, in the preparation room that had become something close to familiar. The one place in the palace where she was most fully herself, surrounded by the evidence of what she did and who she was. He came in without knocking, which he had begun doing weeks ago when the knocking started feeling performative rather than polite, and he stood near the window the way he stood in places he was thinking about rather than occupying. She went on working. The purge treatment was finished, but she had begun building a restorative protocol for the next phase of Torin's recovery, and there was always something to be done. "I told you later," he said. She set down what she was holding. "I know. You let me prepare it and then redirected me every time. Because the work came first. The work is finished." She looked at him across the table. The amber of his eyes had lost the particular strain it had been carrying since the night at the river. Not gone entirely, because that kind of thing left marks, but settled to something that was its own rather than borrowed from crisis. The bond moved in the space between them, steady and clear and impossible to misread now that there was nothing pressing it sideways. "What I did," he said, "at the river." "You were wrong," she said. "That is the truth of it. You were wrong, and it cost Torin 2 weeks, and it would have cost him more if Edric had not moved when he did." Osric received this without argument. "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it to punish you. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that I will not remain somewhere that my judgment can be dismissed the moment a more convenient account is offered." She held his gaze. "If I stay, in any capacity, that is the condition." He was quiet for a moment. "In any capacity," he repeated. The bond said what they were both thinking. She could feel his wolf the way she could feel her own. The recognition running both directions, clear and patient, like something that had been waiting a long time for the obstructions in front of it to be removed. "I agree to the condition," he said. "Then we can discuss what staying looks like." The conversation that followed was long and unhurried, the way conversations were when neither person was performing certainty they did not have. There was no claiming that night, no formal declaration, nothing that would have satisfied the court's appetite for visible resolution. What there was instead was a man and a woman in a room they had both come to understand, working out the beginning of something with the same deliberateness she brought to every case that mattered. Slowly, by choice. On ground they were building as they went. Outside the window, the Garn moved south in the dark, carrying nothing in particular. The autumn had given way, and the nights had begun to hold their cold past dawn. Somewhere in the family wing, Torin was sleeping in the sound and unremarkable way that healthy children slept, both lungs working as they were meant to work, his small name now sealed into the pack record by his father's voice in front of witnesses. Later, she would think that this was what it felt like when the work was actually finished. Not like a conclusion, but like a foundation. Not the end of a thing, the start of what came after.